So dopamine is one of the catecholamines. It's part of a group of cousin molecules. Dopamine being one, epinephrine, also called adrenaline, and norepinephrine, also called noradrenaline. They work together to create motivation and to heighten focus.
Can you talk a little bit about the differences between the motivation and effort? I often, it's very easy to confuse them, but some people have a really hard time, even if they want to do something, I want to do this thing, but I just can't put that cognitive effort in to do it. Are there any little, ways that people can, using the understanding of this dopamine system, help themselves to kind of push through and put that effort in?
Yeah, great question. So dopamine is one of the catecholamines. It's part of a group of cousin molecules. Dopamine being one, epinephrine, also called adrenaline, and norepinephrine, also called noradrenaline. These are released both in the brain and body from the adrenals, in the case of norepinephrine, from a brain area called the locus coeruleus, which releases norepinephrine in kind of a sprinkler-like manner into the brain, although it can direct the release of norepinephrine as well. And of course, all of this stuff is active and released from neurons in our body as well. It's not a coincidence, it can't be a coincidence that these three neurochemicals, which by the way are very similar to one another and actually are manufactured from one another biochemically. It's very interesting. People can go look up, how is epinephrine made, how is dopamine made, and you'll see that the molecules are actually made essentially from each other. They're cleaved by enzymes and there's various changes there, but they work together to create motivation and to heighten focus in the case of norepinephrine and epinephrine. In fact, these are the same neurochemicals that cause the changes in our pupil size under constant illumination to change the optics of our eyes so that we narrow our visual focus. People have heard, for instance, if your pupils get really big, right, that's a state of underlying autonomic arousal that leads to a narrower visual window and a heightened focus. Okay, whereas a shrinking of the pupils causes something quite different. Norepinephrine, epinephrine, and dopamine are involved in all of that, and that's not a coincidence. At the same time, and I'll answer your question directly in a moment, but you said some people tend to be highly motivated. I'd be curious to run an experiment. I haven't run this experiment, but some people have kind of a resting bounce to them. They have it looks like they're ready to go. They're just excited, they're ready to go. Other people have a kind of what looks to be a more lethargic stance. They're more still. That can be a bit misleading because sometimes they're very active inside, still waters run deep kind of thing. But it is interesting that some people are very, you say, hey, should we head out? And they go, yeah, let's go. And they just sort of pop out of their seat. Other people are kind of and this is independent of how tired or alert we are kind of thing. So I think people idle at different RPM. I've noticed that certainly different dog breeds do that. They've been bred for that. I had a bulldog, low RPM, very low RPM. We also had a pit bull years ago. Tail was always going, higher RPM, more likely to engage in spontaneous movement. People are like that too. Okay, so if people lack motivation, does that reflect some deficit in the dopamine system? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. What we know is that many people have a hard time initiating movement. Remember that in the Parkinson's patient, it's not just resting tremor that they have, lack of smooth movements, motor movements. They also have a lot of difficulty initiating movement. Okay, so this is in the neurons that control movement, but it's a similar thing in the motivation realm. This is why I keep drawing this parallel between physical movement and mental movement. We don't really have a better language for it, at least not that I'm aware of. But mental movement is the motivation to open a book and start reading with a high degree of focus to take in that information, as opposed to, kind of opening in I don't want to do this, or, just kind of not necessarily apathy, but challenges and leaning into mental effort. The two things, meaning movement and cognitive movement or pursuit, are both governed by the same neurochemical systems, these three catecholamines, mainly dopamine, with the norepinephrine and epinephrine being involved in generating focus. Other systems involved too, of course, but this is still true.